The New York Jets head coach and general manager search is in full swing. The Jets are scheduled, have requested to interview, or have completed interviews with 15 candidates for the head coaching position, 14 at the general manager position. One Jets reporter pointed out a dark horse candidate to look out for, and he's a familiar face in the New York market. We'll break that down and much more, all coming up here on a pre-recorded edition of NY Flight Jets Talk with our guy, Paul Boy Green Esden Jr., joining us here on the show.
Jets, Jets, let's go.
Jets wide receiver Wesley Walker. Wesley, how you doing today? ESPN writer, Mr. Rich Cimini, Jets reporter for The Athletic, Mr. Zach Rosenblatt, Hall of Famer, and Jets legend, Mr. Marty Lyons.
Your host, Connor Law.
Hello everyone and welcome into another edition of NY Flight Jets Talk, Wednesday, January 8th, and here we are. New York Jets head coach, general manager search in full swing. They're basically interviewing everyone. Anyone who's ever held a clipboard before, both the head coach and general manager position. A ton of candidates to get into. But one Jets reporter in the name of Connor Rogers pointed out a dark horse candidate to look for. And he's a familiar face within the Jets organization. That is none other than former Jets quarterback Josh McCown. Everyone smash the like button. Make sure you are subscribed to the channel. Let's bring in our guest for today's show. You all know him. He's one of the best Jets content creators out on the internet. He goes by the name of Paul Boy Green Esden Jr. Paul, how you doing? And I appreciate you hopping on.
And look at this, Connor. You've got the merch, the NY Flight Jets Talk hat. That's very nice. And things must be going well. You got a PS5 back there, an autographed Jets helmet. I mean, good Lord. I mean, it's been too damn long since I've been on the show, but it sounds like the stock has risen for the program. That's God bless. Good news.
Boy Green, appreciate it. And yeah, we were talking off air. Last time we spoke was coming off the Jets' Week 3 dominant win over the Patriots game. We both met at that game. It was a great Thursday night game. We thought that was, the spark of greatness that this team needed between Aaron Rodgers, the defense, everything. And little did we know, Boy Green, that was the beginning of the end, because they would go on to lose at home against Denver. They would go on to lose in London against the Vikings. They would, lose in Buffalo, and then boom, it's just like a snowball rolling down the hill. And there we are. We finished the season 5-12 record. We're talking about a new head coach and general manager coming into the building. But Boy Green, before we get into the main topic of today's video, I just want to get your thoughts here. Where do you really stand overall in the search? Do you want to prioritize potentially a younger, innovative mind? Are you prioritizing experience here? Are there any first timers you would be okay with? Where do you sit right now?
A lot of good questions. I'll just say, if there was, while the season was what it was, but to know that if we could have, again, because Week 3, it was sort of random for me that just so happened to be the game. But for it to be Jets Patriots, for it to have the atmosphere of meeting you, your dad, and a million, I'm going to miss people like Uncle Tio Snowball, Johnny Boy, all the great commenters and content creators on YouTube. It was so cool to meet everybody. But for that to be the game and us to celebrate and enjoy that one special night, obviously it didn't spark anything. But in that moment, just to embrace it, the atmosphere of what MetLife can look like when we're all believing and everything's going right, that should still be, even though it didn't inspire for the season it was in. Hopefully it can inspire on a greater surface level for future seasons for fans going, oh, so this is, just a taste of what it's supposed to look like. So shout out to Week 3, Jets Patriots, better times perhaps. But to your question on GM, head coach, to be honest, I like a balanced diet. I think that's important. It's important for a growing young man like you, Connor, every day. But it's also important for the Jets coaching search. And I'm going to be honest, there are candidates on my hit list that I love that are first-timers, like Aaron Glenn. He's really grown on me throughout this process. He's a first-time guy if he got the opportunity. He's on the list. But guys that have done it before, like Mike Vrabel, are certainly on the list as well. Brian Flores is another one. It's grown on me a little bit, but he's like one of those ones that you have to – it's like a friend that crossed you once before, but he's been pretty solid besides that. You look at him sideways all the time like, is this guy gonna flip on me again? Is that gonna happen? Because again, the Tua incident. So I always, despite the rest of it looking pretty good, 2 of his 3 seasons in Miami were winning seasons. What he's done with Minnesota is great, but that one time he kind of snapped. You're kind of like, I'm not so sure, buddy. So the Brian Flores one still gives me a little bit of the heebie-jeebies, if I may, as a guy. But there's a lot of intriguing things about him. And you mentioned our boy Connor Rogers of so many different mediums. I'm going to be honest, I'm sold, baby. The Josh McCown thing is incredibly intriguing. I think when a lot of people have brought him up in the past, paired with Brian Flores, okay, I could kind of see the vision. But just screwing the Brian Flores part and just going straight McCown on their tuchus. I mean, whoa, mamacita. That's a spicy meatball. And the Jets have only had one offensive head coach under the Woody Johnson leadership group, and that's Adam Gase, and it went horribly. So to dip our toes potentially back in those waters are exciting. So, like I said, you mentioned it at the cold open, the top here. They are interviewing a lot of bodies. I mean, both at head coach and GM, and we could go through all kinds of names, but a lot of them intrigue me. Like I said, Aaron Glenn. Mike Vrabel's on my list. A guy that's not on the request list, but I hope he is eventually. Todd Monken is very high on my list. He would be intriguing to me. Aaron Glenn's intriguing to me. So Mike Vrabel, Aaron Glenn, Todd Monken. A sneaky one that is sort of like you see it on the list and you're like, Thomas Dimitroff at general manager. He had a wonderful run with the Falcons. Matt Ryan, Jake Matthews, Julio Jones trade
Grady Jarrett.
Yeah, sure. Grady Jarrett would be on that list. Like, obviously, he wasn't perfect. He was eventually fired, but he's someone that's on the list that really revs my engine as well. So, yeah, there's a good variety in the data. I think the Jets have done a Brian Gain, let me give him a shout-out, a general manager. He intrigues me a lot. Former Jets player, former Jets scout, a longtime executive. He's someone as well. But, there are people on both sides of the list. I think the Jets have done a really good job with the interview list so far. It's very thorough on both sides.
Yeah, I know a lot to unpack there. I'm going to start with the first candidate you mentioned, in Aaron Glenn, Detroit Lions defensive coordinator. I'm starting to like him more and more, and the reason I've really dug so deep in him because I think he is going to be the next Jets head coach. I think that's something the Jets would do. Obviously, first-round pick, 1994 draft, great run with the Jets, 8 years, a couple Pro Bowl appearances. Then after his retirement in 2008, returned to them for 2 more seasons. Personnel scout. I'm a huge fan of what he brings to the table, his fiery personality. No stranger to the New York market. I think that's something the Jets are looking for here. Brian Flores is a name I really like because if you think about it, there are not that many candidates who have head coaching experience, this coaching cycle, and you look what he did his time in Miami. Yes, there was that, sour relationship with Tua Tagovailoa that ultimately ended up, getting him fired, but you mentioned it, 2 winning seasons. They ultimately didn't get to the playoffs, finished 1 game under 500. Now he's completely revitalized the Minnesota Vikings defensive unit. So a lot to like there. Thomas Dimitroff is probably my number 1 general manager candidate. A ton of experience from 2006 to 2020 with the Falcons. 11 Pro Bowlers he drafted, Boy Green, over his tenure there. Julio Jones, Matt Ryan, Jake Matthews, some of the names you mentioned. Grady Jarrett in the 5th round. He found a ton of diamonds in the rough on day 3, so I'm all on board with him. Brian Gaines, a really interesting one because he currently with the Bills as their assistant general manager. He spent 1 season, the 2019 season, serving as the Texans general manager. He went 11-5 that season. Then there were some scandals of what he was doing with some of the employees in terms of based on their race or something. And they ultimately moved on from him. But the Texans later claimed it had nothing to do with that. And they simply thought he wasn't good enough. But he's really revitalized his career as an executive now with the Bills. So I really want to get into Josh McCown there. You mentioned that you're kind of all in on him. He's really interesting because he had experience with the Panthers serving as their quarterback coach under Frank Reich. He was ultimately canned 12 weeks into the season after the team started 1-11. Now he's with the Vikings, and he's basically, Sam Darnold has had this crazy resurgence, his former Jets teammate, and Darnold's given a lot of credit to McCown. The way I looked at that head coach interview, Boy Green, and that's what I said right away, is I wanted them to interview McCown. I wanted them to interview Ron Rivera. Some of the main reasons, I think those are 2 prime candidates for OC and DC. I thought maybe, hey, you bring Aaron Glenn in here, and Josh McCown is very impressive in his head coaching interview. He interviewed for the Texans job in 2020 and 2021. Hey, maybe he's not, the great fit, particularly for the head coaching position, but Aaron Glenn comes in, hey, Tanner Engstrand just got promoted in Detroit. He's not going to come here with me. Do you have any recommendations? Oh, Josh McCown was very impressive in his interview. Brian Greasy, the 49ers quarterback coach, is going to interview. He was very impressive. So that's the way I view it, but you said you're all in. Just go a little more in depth there for me, Boy Green. What does all in really mean? Because we've seen it before. I mean, Zach Taylor went from being the Rams quarterback. He had a little more experience. He was assistant wide receivers coach. He had more experience overall, but he was never a coordinator. He went from being the Rams quarterback coach right into the Bengals head coaching job. So McCown, I would love him as an OC, but I think there's going to be, someone's going to need to sell me a little bit more on him as a head coach. And if he comes in as a head coach, I want a strong staff around him with several, coaches who have head coaching experience.
Yeah, part of the reason that I'm intrigued by Josh McCown is obviously we have to start with some of the who he is as an everything, as a player, a guy that came into the league as a third-round draft choice and carved out his own path. He would, third-round picks all the time. Jet fans know this. Our Darius Stewart alert. Like, there's third-round picks that end up doing nothing for teams, and then they're quickly out of the National Football League. So for Josh McCown to carve out a career that went from 2002 to 2020, playing for basically every NFL team and your grandma's team, is incredible. That he was able to do that and carve out a career for so long. He built relationships. He had a long career. He was a great mentor. That's part of it. Quarterback development, to be honest, for the majority of his career, he was a backup. So for him to kind of channel, he almost wore the coaching hat before he actually wore the coaching hat, doing some of that quarterback developmental skills. Obviously, he deserves a lot of credit for what we saw with Sam Darnold. He got the QB coach role, as you mentioned, with the Panthers, and that was kind of a disaster. It seemed like a dream all-star staff on paper that Frank Reich operated there with so many guys. I mean, Deuce was on that team. You had Frank Reich. Again, it was just a superstar lineup, but for a variety of reasons, it all sort of fell apart, and Josh McCown was a casualty from that group, and he was dusted off and scooped up by Kevin O'Connell and company, and that's another thing too. You mentioned Zach Taylor's path, right? He drank a cup of coffee that may or may not have also been brewed by Sean McVay. People are like, boom, superstar. And to be honest, while he might be heading on the hot seat heading into the 2025 season, he took the Bengals to the Super Bowl. He's had a lot of success, and obviously offensive coaches are the sex appeal, the really sexy thing that's going on right now. So being around Kevin O'Connell to me is a major plus. Seeing Sam Darnold's direct results, that was his former teammate as well. Obviously, he's got a relationship with the organization. And to be honest, he would have been the Houston Texans coach, I believe, if the reports didn't go public that they were going to hire him, and everyone went, what the? He hasn't done anything. He's got zero resume. How could you possibly hire this guy? That's questionable. Like, you can't do that. And I think the Texans were affected by the public perception of the potential of hiring McCown. They back out of it, go a different path, and we all see what ultimately ended up happening. So Connor Rogers also, from some of his conversations with league personnel, I listened to. He talked about this take on Badlands and their War Room, like two different tiers of podcasting. So he explained this in different tiers, which was kind of interesting. He said from people he talks to, everyone knows Josh McCown is eventually going to be an NFL head coach. It's just whether or not, in his Connor Rogers' opinion, he talked about how if you hired him this cycle, the Jets or any team, you'd be doing it maybe a year early based on experience. But if you're a year early, but you're still on the right guy, why not be the person that's a little bit early on it, and then you reap the benefits down the line as opposed to missing this opportunity? Because, the Jets don't want to one-and-done coaches. They don't want to be the New England Patriots. I'm just kidding. But, they don't want to develop a reputation like that. So if they hire somebody this cycle that's not named Josh McCown, then they may miss out on the Josh McCown experience overall, because whoever you bring in, unless it's an epic disaster, like a scandal or something, like Urban Meyer level stuff, you're not going to fire whoever the Jets hire after a year, which means if McCown's ready next year, the Jets are going to be out of the cycle. They won't be possible to potentially hire him. So I'm glad that they're interviewing him. He's a captivating presence. I've seen a ton of interviews that he's done, like privately, like one-on-one with people before, and he seems to be a riveting guy, a great motivator from that standpoint. So while I get it, the initial resume, you see that he's only been coaching, quote unquote, since 2023, but quite frankly, he's been coaching his entire NFL career primarily as a backup, and I think that should be factored into the evaluation process. So the offensive thing intrigues me. The quarterback development intrigues me. His relationship in the NFL beyond the Jets is well regarded. He's a leader of men. All of those combination of things really intrigue me. Again, I don't know if that means he's the number one candidate, but when you evaluate the pool and where you sense things are going, I'm all in on Josh McCown.
Yeah, a little spicy nugget, as you would say here, Boy Green, from his playing/coaching career is in 2019, when he was still playing with the Eagles, he would fly down to Myers Park High School in Charlotte, North Carolina, twice a week for practice and game day. So he was coaching high school football while he was still playing with the Eagles. So a really interesting story, just goes to show his dedication, how much it means to him like you mentioned, a motivator, a mentor. Now, Boy Green, I know we only have a few minutes left here, so let's rapid fire through these last few candidates. I want to pick your brain. I'm gonna stay with two head coach candidates I found really interesting: Darren Rizzi and Matt Nagy. Darren Rizzi, obviously Saints special teams coordinator, interim head coach. He inherited a really poor situation when Dennis Allen was fired. Over the past 8 games, he's led them 3-5. And based on what we've seen in this press conferences, based on what the players have seen, it seems like a guy who has a fun, fiery personality who's going to hold guys accountable. He's been a special teams coordinator for, I think, over a decade now. So he's a really interesting name to keep your eye on. Jets requested to speak with him. Thoughts on that? I view him as a pretty intriguing option.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people are going to forget about this because this name I'm about to say has been in the NFL for so long, most people forget about his origin story. But the one and only John Harbaugh was a special teams coordinator when he was hired by the Baltimore Ravens. So his original path, people forget, because like I said, he's just been a very wildly successful head coach. His roots are special teams. And Harbaugh came over, and he's obviously had wonderful success in the NFL level, Super Bowl champion, and everything else. So with that being said, I don't want to disrespect Darren Rizzi, but I'm about to disrespect him. I'll say with all due respect, and then we're allowed to say whatever we want, I suppose. Of course. Darren Rizzi feels to me like the little engine that could. It's like the Antonio Pierce interim story. The situation went horrible. Dennis Allen gets fired. Darren Rizzi revs up the troops as this fiery guy. If you see him in the locker room videos that have gone viral or the press conferences, what have you, and he rallied the Saints to be slightly better than what they were. But this is a team that still has a top 15 pick in the 2025 NFL draft. I feel like the Jets would be making a grave mistake by hiring Darren Rizzi because, again, he made the best of his situation. You look at his resume, there's all kinds of wonderful special teams coordinator positions, a head coach at Rhode Island for a season. There's all kinds of variety. He's been coaching football since I was born on this earth as a graduate assistant back in 1993. So, I mean, he's been coaching football as long as I've been on the planet. So obviously Rizzi has had a wonderful football career that people can only dream of. But in terms of this Jets opportunity, I think they'd be doing themselves a disservice sliding in that particular direction. It'd be riding the hot wave. The Raiders did that. Interim coach Antonio Pierce got a spark, said, "Oh, this is clearly the guy." Hired. And then he was fired at the end of the year. I think sometimes the interim coach thing works. Most of the time it does not. No thank you on Darren Rizzi.
I think, Boy Green, to kind of add fuel to that Raiders fire there you mentioned of keeping Antonio Pierce after interim, I think if they were to keep an interim head coach in the past 5-7 seasons, I think it was Rich Bisaccia after he brought them to the playoffs,
correct,
following John Gruden's dismissal. So that Raiders team got off to a rough start, and then Bisaccia, who was a special teams coordinator as well, gave them a spark and brought them to the playoffs. So I think if they were to keep an interim, Bisaccia was the right answer. Now he's with the Packers, serving as their special teams coordinator. The other head coach candidate, Boy Green, before we dig into a few GMs, is Matt Nagy. He's someone who finished his tenure in Chicago with a winning record, but it doesn't really feel that way. The reputation that he receives is this guy who was a failed head coach, lifeless, just a flat personality, didn't do much. But no, he brought a team to the playoffs with Mitch Trubisky as quarterback. He was voted AP Coach of the Year for a season, 12-5 year. Chicago, like I said, ultimately finished his tenure with a winning record. He's not the most captivating candidate, so to speak, for myself, but if you think about it, he checks a few boxes. He brought a team to the playoffs with a poor quarterback in Mitch Trubisky. He has head coaching experience, and while he might not have a huge influence in Kansas City's offense, he returned to the Andy Reid coaching tree where he ultimately came from, serving as a quarterback coach under Reid in 2008 with the Eagles. That's how he really kickstarted his coaching career. So he's been around in the league coaching staff, has head coaching experience, and is coach of the year. He's brought a team to the playoffs with a less than stellar quarterback. Boy Green, thoughts on Nagy?
Yeah, he's a complicated beast, if I'm being frank. You mentioned the record with Chicago of having a 12-4 season, a couple of 8-8 years, and then the 6-11 year, which ultimately he was fired shortly thereafter. hey, 12 wins. The most wins the Jets have ever had in a single season is 12, and they did that in 98. They did that once. So to hire a coach that had done that previously, and let alone previously, in his very first season and winning the NFC North, I mean, that's incredibly compelling. So you have to give a tip of the cap to Nagy for that. And again, with all this Mitchell Trubisky seasons in the mix there for Nagy. That's the other part that's complicated, is what you just said. I don't exactly know what his role was, or has been with the Kansas City Chiefs, which was his calling card to be hired in the first place by the Chicago Bears. So the fact that he was a former head coach, again, we talked about experience earlier. The Jets have only had very few former experienced head coaches. Adam Gase is one. And then I'm trying to think beyond that of someone who else, going back all the way to 2000 and now. I think Adam Gase might be the only ever first time or head coach previous to the one they hired. So there you go. You just said it there. So that's the part that is intriguing, that a guy that's done it before, you don't have to learn on the job. But again, with the Chiefs, when you look at his Chiefs resume here, being the QB coach for a couple of years, being the OC for a couple of years, then, hey, I'm head coach of the Bears. Oh, no, that didn't work out. All right, back to the Chiefs. Like, what did he do? Andy Reid is the guy there. And it's hard. And again, it makes it difficult. Maybe Nagy did A, B, C, D, but it's not, it's not just obvious, right? I can't just check his LinkedIn and say, oh, let's see what his day-to-day operations were with the Kansas City Chiefs. It's not as clear. So he's going to have to articulate that. I'm sure he did. The interview is complete with the New York Jets for that position. So he has to articulate that to the Jets. I don't know. On the surface, if I'm being blunt, and honesty is key in all parts of life, Connor, it's initiate the gag reflex. It's whoa! When I hear Matt Nagy, I'm like, what? Disgusting. But again, when you dive a little bit deeper, that's James Woody's guy. He loves Nagy, and he's on his list. So again, maybe I have to do a discount double check. My initial gut reflection is disgusting. And again, I don't know what he did with the Chiefs. You do know what he did with the Bears. Just for whatever reason, he doesn't seem to get the sort of credit that maybe another coach with a different name may have received for what they accomplished in the 4 years with Chicago.
Now, Boy Green, I know we only have a few minutes left, so let's rapid fire. I have a few more general manager candidates I want to get your thoughts on. The first two, John Eric Sullivan, the Packers vice president of player personnel. He has a really interesting story, in my opinion. He started with the Packers back in 2004. He's been in a bunch of different roles. Prioritized his career. As an executive, he's been known for scouting. He's reportedly the first scout who turned their general managers onto Jordan Love, who's now is going to probably go on to be their franchise quarterback, or at least I think so. Just getting this huge contract, what he's put on tape, especially this season, I think he's an elite player. Apparently him and Aaron Rodgers didn't have a great relationship over in Green Bay. So if John Eric Sullivan is named the general manager of this team, that would pretty much seal Aaron Rodgers' fate. And the two other guys I want to get your thoughts on, Ryan Grigson, former Colts general manager, brought him to the AFC Championship game. Boy Green, hear me out here. I was first disgusted when I heard his name because of him not being able to build an offensive line. But the more I thought about it, the Jets have 4 of their 5 pieces in line for the offensive line. Re-signing Morgan Moses could potentially solidify all 5 spots. So he has a winning record as a GM. He's won Executive of the Year. I know the knock was him not being able to form an offensive line again around Andrew Luck, but the Jets have an offensive line right now for what feels like the first time in forever, and certainly the first time in my life.
There's a lot to unpack there. I love the expert thinking here by Connor. You're like, okay, I'm going to be honest. Ryan Grigson disgusted me because he couldn't build an offensive line for Andrew Luck. But Boy Green, hear this. The offensive line is already made, so he can't mess it up. And you're like, well, okay, that's pretty compelling. And then you're like, well, the executive of the year and the rest of the stuff is okay if you just look past the offensive line thing. And it is a compelling, rationale to fight for the guy to say, hey, man, the offensive line is set. And I don't think enough Jet fans are giving that credit, Connor, because Olu Fashanu was terrific. John Simpson was one of the best guards in football. When you look at all the numbers, Joe Tippmann, all reliable, AVT, while I don't think he's touched the all-pro spark chatter that people said early in his career coming off the injury. He still was rock solid. And then you have right tackle, which, again, I think a lot of people would be in favor. Morgan Moses is a very popular Jet among Jet fans. He's a tough SOB. He's a veteran's veteran. He's a pro's pro. And I would not be opposed to bringing him back on a 1-year deal, drafting a guy or bringing somebody else in, let them compete. And at worst, he's this veteran swing tackle that brings good vibes to the locker room. And then the best case scenario is he stays healthy and he's a rock solid right tackle and allows a youngster to develop behind him. So, right, the offensive line being solid there is intriguing. Obviously, Grigson has a direct correlation with his most recent work with the Minnesota Vikings and obviously how he's rebuilt himself. And he's got a strong connection, of course, to Flores. He's been there with the Vikings since 2022. And even when he left the Colts job, he immediately dipped his toe back in the pool, going with the Browns as an executive, a consultant with the Seahawks for a couple years, back to the Browns as a senior football advisor. So he didn't take a break from the game like some other general managers do, where they just kind of prance through, the roses. He really got right back into it and started diving from job to job. So again, to the same conclusion perhaps you reached, where initially like, ugh. But is it that one meme or gif out there? A girl goes, no. Well, I'm not sure. Well, maybe. I don't know. I guess that's it with Ryan Grigson. Because, again, the offensive line is rock solid for the Jets. So it would be hard for him to mess it up. And a guy I haven't really talked a lot about on my show or any show is the name you brought up from Green Bay, John Eric Sullivan. He's got a really intriguing path where he's kind of hit a lot of the different jobs, from VP of player personnel, most recently director of college scouting, the rawness or the roots rather as a scout. That to me is really intriguing, obviously. So that's a cool path. And he's from a winning organization. The Packers, just from Brett Favre to Aaron Rodgers to Jordan Love, they figured out this quarterback thing. If he could share that secret recipe, like Plankton trying to steal it from the Krusty Krab, phenomenal. Share that recipe with the New York Jets. That'd be wonderful. He's an intriguing name that's not getting enough hubbub, I think, in Jets content creator land as a GM candidate, but he's one that intrigues me greatly.
Yeah, now Boyd Green, like I said, I know we have to wrap up here shortly, so just one more candidate I want to get your thoughts on. Jets announced today they're scheduled to interview him. That's Chris Spielman, the brother of Rick Spielman, who's assisting with the general manager search. Boyd Green, he's really interesting because he doesn't have GM experience, but he basically reportedly turned the Lions into hiring Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell, and we all know how that went. The Lions were the laughing stock of the NFL, that still have not won a Super Bowl, and now you look and they've had this rapid turnaround, this rapid resurgence with both Holmes and Campbell. So I think Spielman's an interesting name. It could be, Rick just doing his brother a favor, but I think he could be considered as a legit candidate here on this list. Former player as well, which is interesting to keep in mind, former linebacker.
100%. He was a tough SOB as a player. So the player thing you love. I love what he's helped the Lions do, again, being the quote-unquote special assistant to the owner and CEO coming in there in 2020. From Lions people that I talked to, he was a major reason and help for the turnaround with Campbell and Brad Holmes and everybody taking over. Again, the resume lacks that certain je ne sais quoi to be a general manager. So maybe just like it is, I think, for some of these other interviews here, Connor, that they're being interviewed for the head coach because that's the headline. But in these meetings, he is learning them, they are learning him, and maybe there's a different role in the front office. We've talked about this director of football kind of gig that could exist, or people brought up Josh McCown. Yeah, no, maybe not as a head coach, but an OC. Again, he's a QB coach with the Vikings. So if Brian Flores was hired, in theory, he could bring in Josh McCown as his offensive coordinator. That would be a promotion. Ryan Grigson could come over as a general manager to keep some of that Viking stuff together. Chris Spielman, in theory, could be brought over in some sort of a intermediate role where you've got the general manager and you have a football operations guy he's a footballer at his core, and he helped do the turnaround with the Detroit Lions. So obviously that would be compelling. And obviously his brother, Rick Spielman, was a wonderful general manager, speaking of all this Vikings connection with the Minnesota Vikings. So I think being around very smart football people in Detroit has certainly helped them. So I don't know if Chris Spielman would be viewed in my mind at this current stage as a clear-cut front runner or anything for the general manager position. But again, there's plenty of front office staff roles to be filled here. And with what Spielman was able to do for Detroit, it seems hard for me that he would leave. He played for the Lions for the majority of his career from 88 to 95. Then he's helped turn them around now. it would have to be a pretty compelling package in my mind to draw him away from Detroit and all the success they're having, which would, again, probably would have to be a GM role. But if there is a world where he would take a job that isn't general manager in this Jets front office, I would love to have Chris Spielman. And remember, he's had a broadcasting career too. He did some of that in between all of this too, which was a lot of fun. So I like Chris Spielman, the guy. Like, me and him could grab a beer, a brewski at the local pub, and he brings a lot of chutzpah to the table. I'm just curious if we could find a different front office role for the young man.
Everyone smash the like button. Make sure you are subscribed to the channel. Follow Boy Green on all social media platforms at BoyGreen25. Boy Green, really appreciate you hopping on. It means the world. One final question here before we let you go.
Yeah, let's go.
We did the 4 dinner guests. We asked you that. Now this is a content idea suggested by our guy Spencer Harris in the NY Flight Jets Talk Discord. He says, quote, idea for the offseason, get guests to share their favorite Jets game and why. So this is the first time tradition started here by Spencer Harris. This is going to be an every time thing with our guests. Boy Green, favorite Jets game in your entire life, and why is that?
And this is attended, I'm assuming, correct?
It could be either. It could be attended or watched on television.
Well, if it was watched, that's easy. It's the year 2011. The Jets beat the Patriots in Foxborough. I imagine this will be a very common answer among people that you ask of Jet fans that are more, I will call them millennial based, but current generation Jet fans, I think a lot of them will pluck that fruit from the tree. So I was not there for that game, but come on, man. LaDainian Tomlinson, the Dennis Byrd jersey, LaDainian Tomlinson's speech before the game. Any man can be beat on any given day. Like, I still have that in my phone, the full speech. So, all of that is true. But sticking with the theme of Jets Patriots, the best Jets game I've ever attended, and it's not close. And shout out to Gotham City crew who hooked me up with tickets for that game. Was Jets Patriots, the year 2015. Actually, the year might have technically been 2016, but it was the 2015 season, Week 16. Jets Patriots. The game goes to overtime. Bill Belichick infamously says, yeah, you guys can have the ball first. And I'm like, that's a choice. Thanks, Bill. And the Jets go right down the field. Quincy Enunwa streaking down the field. And Ryan Fitzpatrick finds Eric Decker, the back right corner of the end zone, for the touchdown, which was the game winner. And I just remember going crazy. And before we got to that end, rewinding a bit, in the middle of the fourth quarter, the Jets got the right result they needed in another game. It involved the Steelers. It might have been Steelers-Ravens. I should probably go back and look, whatever that was. But whatever happened worked out for the Jets, that if they beat the Patriots that game, that the next week against the Buffalo Bills was win and you're in, and you control your own destiny. Prior to the game, they did not control their own destiny. So we're losing it because at the time on MetLife, they throw it up on the screen. Oh, my God, the Steelers lost or whatever. The Jets, you control your destiny. We're like losing. Oh, my God, all we have to do is win this game. And I was on the field before the game. I had special field access, so I got to dap it up with a bunch of Jet players and hang out with Brandon Marshall and all these guys right on the field, and that was it. Ryan Fitzpatrick finds him. I'm like, this is great. We're going back to the playoffs. Of course, the Jets would lose the following week, and Ryan Fitzpatrick would throw 3 interceptions in the fourth quarter. Thanks, Ryan. And that unfortunately magical season. I thought the Jets, if they got in the playoffs, were winning the Super Bowl. They were red hot. They had won 5 or 6 in a row heading into that final game against the Buffalo Bills. And Rex Ryan, of course, another Jets interview candidate on the list he didn't ask about. How did you not get to him? But that game right there, the atmosphere was electric. The Jets beating the Patriots, of course, because we all hate the Patriots. Overtime winner. Eric Decker jumping in, doing the Lambeau leap with all the fans going crazy all over him. That's a moment I'm never going to forget for the rest of my life.
Yeah, so I'm going to try to make mine. I'm trying to get mine out quick here. So for the ones I've attended, I've only attended 4 Jet games in my life. 3 of them.
Really?
Oh,
wow.
So yeah, first game I ever attended was week 3 of last, 2 seasons ago now. So 2023 against the Patriots. It was an awful game. I forget the final score, but it was all field goals. It was Zach Wilson, this and that. I think it was 13-8 or something. I don't count on me here, but it was an ugly game. It was rainy. So that was my first ever Jet game. So I'm always going to remember that, but probably put that towards the end. Christmas Eve against the Commanders in 2023. I went to that game as well. Fun game, Trevor Siemian, and then you almost blow the league, and Greg Zuerlein has to kick a game-winning field goal there to go ahead. And after that game, the next day, Christmas Day, I recorded the first ever episode of NY Flight Jets Talk. So that game will always hold a special place in my heart. I was recapping that game, but attended, I have to jump to, I went to the London game week 5. That was a super cool experience.
So cool.
But out of the game, like from an actual in-game experience, I'd say it's week 3. Meeting all the content creators, watching the Jets go out and dominate the division rival New England Patriots. It was such a fun time. And for games I've watched on television, I'm going to go with an interesting one here. 2022 Jets versus Browns. Joe Flacco, second start of the season. Jets were 0-1 after a loss to the Ravens at home. Week 1, Joe Flacco goes out, throws for over 300 yards. Garrett Wilson over 100 receiving yards, 2 touchdowns. Elijah Moore had a touchdown. They ran a fake punt earlier in the game. Braden Mann throwing that by way of Braden Mann, and that sparked things. So I thought that was a super fun game. And then how can you not forget recovering the onside kick? You go down, you score a touchdown, Joe Flacco to Corey Davis, and then you're like,
wide open.
Whatever, garbage time. Let's see if they can get the onside kick. And then boom, they get the onside kick. Flacco drives down the field and hits Garrett Wilson in the end zone, 31-30 victory. So those are my 2 favorite Jet games all time. Boy Green, it means the world that you were able to hop on with me today. You got any final thoughts?
I just want to repeat that great memories, by the way. Those are some great choices for games. What a wild game. Nick Chubb goes out of bounds to give the Jets a chance at the end of the game, which is crazy.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's wild. So no, you had great choices. Awesome. I can't wait to hear what other wonderful guests that you have on the show answer to that when they're asked, especially ones that have been around, like Rich Cimini, who's been covering the team for like 30 some odd years. I bet 36. He'd have some great answers to that question. But no, awesome. I love coming on, Connor. I can't believe it had been that long, but I normally would say, I regret not coming on earlier. But based on the season, I am perfectly okay that we did not meet up in the middle of this. That's probably better for both of our sanities and psyches. But I'm hoping we get to do it a lot more. Doing the show heading into the year, us together was awesome. A lot of the fans really appreciated that.
That was in the huddle.
So, yeah, 100% in the huddle. It was great to be in the huddle with you, Connor.
Yeah,
from one former player to another. It was great to be in the huddle with you. You called better plays than I've heard all season for the New York Jets. So perhaps you should be in the running for that. But it was a lot of fun. And anytime I could come on the show, buddy, it's always a good time.
Boy Green means the world. Everyone follow Boy Green on all social media platforms if you haven't already. At BoyGreen25. Smash the like button. Make sure you are subscribed to the channel. We greatly appreciate all of your support here on the show, and hopefully we'll be back here in a week or two, and we're talking about the next Jets head coach and general manager. Appreciate all you guys. For Boy Green, I am your host, Connor Long, signing off. JT.